Um, so, what a great lineup of talks today. Thank you guys all so much. It was really, my head is swimming with amazing ideas and thoughts on all of these different topics, and it's hard to know really where to start, so I'll try to just kind of ask a general question. I was thinking about this idea of distance and time, and thinking that we often, we've been craving getting closer and having things happen faster, but it's kind of served a human need. In some weird way, like becoming a global community has helped us think about emerging global problems and global connections that were impossible before. But now I'm starting to see this isolationism and nationalism almost as a reflex against it. I'm wondering what you guys think about that. Thinking about distance and how it serves us and where we might be going at this moment with our technologies and how we are moving forward with them. What is going on? What is happening right now at this moment? Anybody can
wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
5-second pause. Was that a stumper question? I'm sorry.
It's a great question.
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, I guess so we, out of our desire to be connected, the internet I feel is just a reflection of our human need in some ways to connect with one another. At the same time, in social media does a similar thing. We want to be updated and keep connected. At the same time, now there's we found almost that being close can have its negatives as well, and we seek distance, solitude, isolation, because I think maybe there might be a fear. But I guess I'm wondering, these technologies, as we implement them and we use them to kind of achieve something in our life, I'm wondering where we're going now if we start pulling back away, or is that not the trend? Is there some path we're going down? It's a little bit of forecasting in the future.
Well, one thing I sort of try to do is to not put technology at the top of the list of even though I'm somebody who's very intimately interested in technology, there's all these times in which and this is, I think, when you teach undergraduates, especially having to start a conversation without talking about contemporary technology at all, and then bringing it into the mix. So, I mean, just around things about being separated. When I talk about, I teach a class on mobile communication, and before we really super get into talking about phones and we talk about connecting, we talk about the television. And Lynn Spiegel, who's a TV and screen scholar, has written all this wonderful work just in thinking about the way that television kind of potentially transported us, but she situates all of that in suburbanization. And so thinking about in what ways people might have felt like they were upwardly mobile socially, but also in terms of being disconnected from other communities they might have had in slums or Lower East Side here in Manhattan or something. And so being able to situate trends of a desire to connect or even a desire to disconnect with our geographic, and ways in which sometimes those are choices and ways in which those are not choices. So I think that power, these kind of deeper conversations about power and how we are able to physically relate to one another as a product of some of these deeper underlying forces, where technology is always both bringing about but also entering into.
It also makes me think of the waiting and how we're kind of rushed to make mob judgments almost now and discern good, bad, right, wrong in the instant. It's just I guess it's a continuing evolution. It's just interesting to think about. Distance is continually shifting, how we perceive it, and it really fits a moment in our own lives, but in our national lives, in our all these different social ways.
There was, in Carolyn Marvin's book, When Old Technologies Were New, she talks about one of the inventors of the telephone discussing the social potential of this medium as it connects us across distances, that there wouldn't be isolation any longer, that this technology would connect us in a way that would build empathy, that we would understand each other because there would be nobody untouched. We could connect with each other and learn from each other, which I think has not happened. But part of it is in the sense that the ways that the technology, at least thinking about social media as opposed to other kinds of media, how the algorithm kind of shapes some of those desires as well, how we get a feedback loop of information that does quickly meet a need for a certain mode of social interaction. So the algorithm's really shaping what you see as opposed to this broad connectivity across distances. Wall Street Journal did during the election red feed, blue feed, where you could look at what two different Facebook profiles look like if you're liberal or if you're Republican, and they're just wildly different.
Well, I think your mention of Carolyn Marvin and then Meryl's suggestion that in teaching she tries to bring in, wait to bring in the contemporary media. It's just a reminder that these topoi, these desires for connection, and then the backlash and the kind of the wish for disconnection, the hope for internationalism, and then the backlash and kind of the reinscription of nationalism happen every time we have a new technology that comes into existence.
Yep.
So these are just, as you mentioned, fundamental desires and needs that kind of are re-performed every time we build hope and dreams and fears around a new technology that comes into existence.
Just to respond to that, and one thing that seems consistent across that I'm kind of personally enjoying more and more of is just the ancient contemplative practices that almost always involve solitude, meditation, things that are really a matter of not being connected to everybody right now. Mm-hmm. So it seems like that, independent of technology, we've always known that we need that kind of time.
In your book, this idea of narrative, well, it wasn't your article, but Jeff Ritchie wrote about the narrative value threshold. There's a certain point when we're not willing to put up with it anymore. We're willing to stay connected and be involved until one thing happens that we then make a decision and react to that. So we do build this ideas for ourselves of what that technology can do until a certain point when we, like a MySpace, where it just becomes a relic of the past that doesn't work for us anymore.
Well, another term you could have used to also, organize part of today, talking about distance and talking about disconnection, is the term community, and the way that term gets manipulated or used, in response to the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook. A kind of reinscription of our goal of Facebook is community, as a way to mask the profit model of what Facebook, the more you share, the more we make money, but also it's also for you to feel good. And so community as a term that, and in other languages and other cultures historically, what that term has meant as being outside of capitalism or responses to fascism, whatever that sort of history is. But I think, just as another term to throw out there, maybe this is a term that other folks who do stuff around community building or community rebuilding or destruction or whatever, but as a term that, I think comes to take on different meanings, and part of the project is a recovery of, not of a singular meaning of what community is, but the multiplicity of these different definitions and ideas as it relates to distance and connection.
Do you think we've narrowed our definition of what community is in some ways? I often wonder if, because we have so much information at our fingertips, if we've become less curious about the world in a way that we've retrenched, or we only want to know so much about a particular sort of or group of people that are very similar to us, but we're not very curious about something that might push on the boundaries of what community might mean. It made me think while you were talking, Meryl, about accessibility. It's a theme that also runs through all of the papers and all of the work we all seem to be doing, and I just wonder that accessibility of information about the world, has that meant that in some ways we've narrowed our focus?
Well, there's the Facebook bubble, right, where we just get this feedback loop.
Mhm.
So I think it involves us being willing, right, to venture outside of those barriers
Well, and also
where
think
we're
of-
comfortable.
I think a balance of like how much of any of this is individual choice and how much of this is like systemic causes that aren't just any one individual. It's like in not to go back to the Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica issue, but talking with my students afterwards, we did like a kind of a moment of like, all right, go and look at what apps you've deleted from your phone. Are you still giving your data to? Like, let's go in and like have you like disconnect those. Also, let's go into your phone. Let's go to location services. How many unnecessary apps are like getting your location 24/7, even when you're not using the app? But even then, I sort of had to like tag it to be like, also, this isn't just your fault. Like, you didn't do, you aren't dumb or you aren't, being hoodwinked. Like, this isn't just about you. This is about something systemic. But they want you to make it about just you. And so that continual, like, questioning of, like, I think the more that we sometimes make it about individuals, which is a very American, thing to do, that then we aren't, like, then necessarily always turning the lens to that, like, larger systemic issue.
I think another kind of American way of thinking about things is another meaning of the term accessibility. I mean, another way to the term access. In many cases, the presumption is that if you just give people access to information, access to data, that should be sufficient. You should be self-motivated, be able to educate yourself, and provide context and all the information you need to turn that data into knowledge or wisdom of some sort. But this, again, ignores the issues of the unequal distribution of different types of access. So this is why terms of like digital inclusion, for instance, have turned to questions of digital equity, recognizing that, for example, folks in public housing don't have access to high-speed broadband. But if you just give them a plug-in, is that sufficient? Maybe you also have to have information literacy pedagogy around it, so people know how to assess the credibility of different resources. So access itself, it's a different way of thinking about the term than the way you're talking about it. That is, again, not sufficient to provide connectivity. There are all these other layers of technological and infrastructural framing that have to go around it.
And even if you, like, have access, do you emotionally care? Are you privileged in other ways in which, like, you use that to your advantage to, be as connected to information as you would like to be, and as disconnected from other information as you would like to be. And so the emotion, and that's why I keep coming back to Arlie Hock. This is sort of talking more politics, but Arlie Hochschild's Stranger in Their Own Land book that came out recently, kind of post-election, and just thinking about in what ways people maybe act against their own best interests, one might think, even though they technically might have access to understand what one's best interest might be, and purposefully disconnect others while feeling more connected to their own communities.
Does anybody have any questions out in the field here? Yeah.
I saw a kind of thread through all the speakers today about maybe putting kind of imperfection ahead of perfection, putting wrong answers ahead of kind of right answers and righteousness, and that kind of one of the underlying problems maybe I'm hearing here is in contemporary society is the need for newness and innovation and solutionism versus what I heard along the way, maybe process learning with the gaming, or more adaptive strategies with the disability work, or not fetishizing the new, or I especially like the shallow answers being powerful, finding something not in having to find the right answer, but in failing in wrong answers. I hope that gives the general vibe for it.
And I guess to add, is that partly like distributing who decides what is considered to be perfect or imperfect, and like what degrees of freedom are allowed with and what the stakes are to that. because I think that the ways in which we kind of allow for error, or in the same way that we might fetishize like grit or like other sort of ways of like, you know, failing as a way to learn, that doesn't get equally seen. You know, not everybody gets those equal opportunities. But yeah, so I feel like for me, it's like it always comes back to power. It's such a cliche, but you know, but the sort of how you make those things visible, or what they get, how they get reinforced or reinscribed in what we build.
Yeah, and I feel like cliche and conventional wisdom are, you know, that's good. Like, rather than saying, oh, geez, that's a cliche, I shouldn't say it. It's like, this cliche for a reason.
Right.
We've learned something.
I think cliched as like a critical academic. It always comes back to power.
Oh. A cliche critical, perspective.
Well, this is part of the beauty of making, right? Is that there is not a defined end goal, but that the exploration is what reveals what maybe the next step is, or what learning was in that activity all along that maybe was unseen to begin with. I know you must get this all the time. You don't actually have the answers when you start. You might have an idea, but what comes out of the projects you build.
Yeah, and actually, there's something to draw attention to here, because I feel like there's a false dichotomy possibly in even the way we're talking right now. So one of the funny things, a tension that I enjoy is, on one hand, for example, our group is an academic group. We work in an academic world, and we hang out with academics and play by the rules of that kind of institution. But a thing that I've noticed recently is that some of the biggest inspiration for things that really for me are, I mean, personally very missional, I'll even use that word, and hopefully altruistic, and hopefully, you know, trying to make the world a better place, and given the tools I have at my disposal, has been just a deep dive into the cutthroat nature of business development. So here I am as an academic reading books about leadership and about startups and about business models. And it's interesting, within the academy, I look at proposals that I put in, let's say recently to the National Science Foundation, and I'm trying to unify what the business people would be calling A/B testing with what we would call rapid randomized control trials, and trying to unify those and realize that at the end of the day, I certainly want to be critical and thoughtful, but at the same time, I want to win. You know what I mean? I want to actually win that. I don't want to build a thing that takes my life, that goes into a lab that 10 people see, that maybe makes a paper that maybe 4 people cite. There's this, I want to actually have, I want to put the best thing I can into the world and use any tool at my disposal to do it. So it's kind of a funny like tension that exists in that, because especially as you use the word failure, which is like, that's the key to the philosophy of learning that our lab works in, is like, how do we have kids celebrate explosive failure and have fun with failure, and assume that 99% of life is failure. So I find that to be really interesting. I don't know, between some of these ideas, the messiness of it all is certainly there, but I'll say something maybe offensive. When I first read of Cambridge Analytica, I was like, these guys are gonna freaking nail it. And it was scary, right? But I couldn't not realize that they were dealing with a force of nature, and it almost turns into a matter of who's harnessing that power, not whether that power will exist, because it does exist. And I'm really curious who's gonna step up to it.
When you say nail it, what is the it they're going to
Yeah.
nail or have nailed?
Okay, so, yeah, that's a great question. So, okay, in Madison, if you've tracked our unfortunate history, I sat on marches on our Capitol that had 250,000 people every single day for months. I mean, it was like, if you look at non-violent protest, we did that well. Best that I've ever seen. It was amazing. Nailed it. Right? Everybody rallied, everybody yelled, we had speakers, we had news coverage, we had all the things. As Governor Walker sat in his office and looked out and said, doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, the sad part is it didn't matter. Like, even during the recall, it didn't matter. We just did that thing. Then when you look at influencing a Facebook feed because you want to see a certain person elected, they succeeded. So I think there is a shifting, what the New London group calls, multiliteracies. We're just, to be literate isn't to be able to read and write in English. It means to participate within society, that you can read and write to a society in such a way that you're part of the conversation. And I would suggest the conversation is shifting. How you do that is always shifting. And right now, machine learning, big data, some of these things, A/B testing, it's how you win.
Certainly in sports, they're using big data to change every single day, shifting the tactics that they use to to win.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the question goes back to how we can get access to that data, or how we would even start to use it in order to integrate that into our lives in a way that was manageable, of course. That we don't have a room of computers or even one computer that's powerful enough to process that data and give us a visualization.
You do. That's the funny part. So when everybody got Twitter and you said that, or YouTube, and everybody has a global audience, what was this, like 8 years ago, 10 years ago, everybody was like, what does this mean? Everybody can be their own news station. It means Justin Bieber, it means cats, it means all kinds of weird stuff. It also means totally new forms of education we never would have predicted, and democratization of, information, and now I don't need to rely on my mechanic to fix the thing. So you have that, but at the same time, I would suggest that one of the next things would be the democratization of deep learning. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a number of groups that are working on that, because I think it's going to become an increasingly part of citizenship, is whether or not you can hook onto an API, mine it for data, and use it to create visualizations that other people can understand. And these are just the base literacies of what will be required of us if we're going to continue to participate in the actual global conversation.
At the same time, I think another civic literacy or necessity is to question the veracity of everything, given that these same technologies can be used for all kinds of deep fakes. So there's really the document is inherently insuspect. Yeah. So when we're trying to cultivate good things, we also have to have bring suspicion to essentially everything. Yep. Which is sad.
No, I wouldn't. It just is.
Yeah, that is a key tension that, the labor of constantly being skeptical and suspicious. For some people, that's not labor. For some people, that is living.
Right.
Well, this is where critical theory came from, though, is that just because something's published by Harvard Press doesn't mean it's representative of what it needs to be. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot, or it's the same thing that as soon as there is a way to publish, we need to start asking who benefits from that thing being published. I feel like it's the same conversation, just the media forms are shifting. Yeah.
Well, we are actually out of time. It's 6:00 and we've had a long day, but we'll be here, and we invite you to stick around, ask any other further questions. I think one of the best ways to combat that is to continue getting together and having these conversations and thinking through these issues. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Really appreciate it.